I'm not gonna be a Spider-Man channel. I promise.
Don't make promises you can't keep, Mr. Parker.
Yeah, but those are the best kind.
Alright, well I'm talking about Spider-Man again because I guess that's all I'm good for. Today we're going to be taking a look at the cinematic tour de force that is The Amazing Spider-Man. The first one. We'll get to you later. With everybody freaking out about Spider-Man leaving the MCU, this movie's getting thrown around a lot in conversation, and I think now's a good time to revisit it. Now, I'm gonna be honest, I kinda like The Amazing Spider-Man. I recognize that it's not a good movie. It's an incredibly messy, choppy, unnecessary cash grab that's rebooting too soon after a series that a lot of people would say is one of the best trilogies of all time, including myself. Studio interference bogged down what could have been a fresh and unique take on the character. But I still kinda like it. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I think the reason that I like it is probably the same reason that a lot of people like it. There are some great aspects to this movie. Amidst all the bullshit and studio interference, there's a genuinely compelling story about Peter Parker and Spider-Man that's fresh and explores ideas not possible in the Raimi trilogy. So I'm going to do my best to make any changes and additions that I think would improve the movie. Remember, this is basically just a really complicated form of movie review. Everything here is biased, so just getting that out of the way first. I'm going to be explaining more in detail my thoughts on specific parts of the movie as we go along, but for now, let's just jump into the rewrite. So the movie starts with the same scene that we got of young Peter playing hide and seek with his dad, only to have his parents suddenly pack up everything and leave without explanation. I know there are a lot of people who don't care for the plot revolving around Peter's parents, but I think it could have been a unique and interesting take to this version of the character. The Raimi movies barely make a passing mention of Peter's parents, so to try and explore a similar storyline in that series wouldn't really fit. This also emphasizes my favorite part about the movie, and that's the theme of fatherhood, and specifically Peter trying to fill the hole in his life left by his father. We faded to present day with Peter in high school. Now, I think it's time to talk about Peter's character in the movie. Everybody fucking hates this guy. But here's a hot take. I don't. I actually really like the direction that they took Peter in this movie. Now hear me out. The skateboard's pretty dumb, and so is taking those creepy pictures. But this Peter is a different interpretation of the bullied loner kid that Peter Parker is at heart. Back in the 60s, you'd get bullied for being a science geek, but not anymore. And the fact that the current Spider-Man goes to a school where he's surrounded by that kind of person shows how high school has changed since Peter Parker's inception. So in an effort to make this version of Peter more modern and realistic, as well as make him unique from the Tobey Maguire version, Mark Webb went a different direction. He decided to emphasize how Peter feels alone and give him traits that make him honestly kind of unlikable. He's selfish and he's a kind of a dick. This version of Peter clearly has some issues regarding his parents leaving him, and that's led to him feeling like the world keeps beating down on him, and so he rejects authority and a lot of society in selfish ways. This isn't the happy-go-lucky science geek that we know. This Peter is a tormented, selfish, lonely individual who makes people uncomfortable. That's honestly the kind of person who might get bullied today. You want to know how I know that? Because everybody did it when the movie came out! You can argue that it's not a great start to the Spider-Man cinematic universe that Sony wants to make, and that's fair, but I think it's an interesting take on this side of Peter, and it allows for him to grow into the Peter that we traditionally know. Also, shut the fuck up about how he's too good looking. When has Peter ever been characterized in the comics as unattractive? The guy's dating a goddamn supermodel, like come on. Especially when the current Spider-Man looks like Tom Holland, who's absolutely gorgeous. The skateboard is pretty dumb though, so just cut that out. So we get that same scene where Peter sticks up for that kid and he gets beat up by Flash, except Gwen doesn't rescue him. Instead, he's just left there on the ground as the bell rings, furthering this idea that he has that the world doesn't care about him. He goes to class and we're introduced to Gwen Stacy. Now, I do want to change their first interaction a bit because honestly, it's bullshit. Peter is basically the black sheep of the school and she just starts up this cute little clever banter with him at the drop of a hat. Like, come on, no. If she were a new student, maybe it could work, but relationships need to build up over time to get to that level of chemistry and banter, especially when Peter is so closed off like he is. You can't just have Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield go off script and call that good dialogue. I think that Gwen should be a bit apprehensive of Peter when they meet. Maybe they're partnered up for a lab or something in class, and she doesn't really talk to him at first, but then over the course of the scene, she sees that he's actually not that bad, and he's actually a genius when it comes to biology. Peter heads home, and we get introduced to Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Now, it's gonna be really hard to top the Ben from the Raimi trilogy. Cliff Robertson was so iconic and left such an impactful impression that the majority of people never want to see the character done any other way. And I respect that. I respect that thought. But I think we will have to do our best to try. Of course, I'd like a movie that starts with a more established Spider-Man post Uncle Ben's death, but the movie did it this way, so we kinda gotta stick with it. This is a rewrite, not a rewrite, if that makes sense. So because the theme of this movie is fatherhood, I want the relationship between Peter and Ben to be as strong as possible. Peter feels abandoned by his father and feels left out by the people around him, except for Ben. We should see Peter's face light up when Ben enters the room. At school, school, he's the depressed kid who doesn't feel wanted, but when he's home and with Ben, everything changes, and he acts like the Peter that we know. Peter should be excited to talk to Ben about any and every single thing because Ben was the father that Peter never had. This can be accomplished in that scene in the basement where Peter finds his dad's old briefcase, as well as in the scene later in Peter's room. Moving on, Peter does some research and he finds that the man in his father's photograph is Dr. Kurt Connors, who is the head scientist at Oscorp. He doesn't use Bing. He uses Yahoo, obviously. Peter goes to Oscorp, where there's a student tour going on, and he steals the spot of another student to get in. It's a bit of a dick move, but it reinforces Peter's lack of responsibility and the selfish things that he's willing to do in order to achieve his goals. So Peter goes on the tour, and instead of Gwen Stacy being the speaker, it's instead Dr. Martha Connors, Kurt's wife and lab partner. My biggest issue with the original movie came from Connors and how he lacked a lot of depth as a character. His motivations were lacking, and he came across as just a standard evil just to be evil villain. And I think that meeting Kurt's family and having them be active players in the story could help remedy that. Not only is it more comic accurate, since that's a big part of the character in the comics, but it would also further add weight to the theme of fatherhood that's throughout the movie. During Peter's tour, we get introduced to Connors separately as he's discussing his current project with his boss, Dr. Otto Octavius. Octavius is actually a really good guy. He's understanding that Connors hasn't been able to crack the genetic modification formula yet and is giving him extra time to work on it. But despite Otto being considerate, Connors is beating himself up about it for not having it done. This isn't so much planting the seeds for Doc Ock, but more so just preparing the ground, if that makes sense. That was a shitty analogy. I don't know why I said that. I don't garden, I just play Animal Crossing. But more importantly, it sets up another big change that I wanted to make for Connors that I'll get into later. Connors comes out to speak to the students, and we get that same interaction we got between him and Peter. His son Billy's also there, just running around the lab like a little fire hazard, and we see that Kurt really loves his son. And this can cut into Peter a little bit, making him break away from the group and start to trespass within the lab. So Peter sneaks around looking for some answers, and eventually he gets bit by the spider. It'd be nice if it wasn't just like a room full of loose spiders because 1, fuck that, that's terrifying. 2, fuck that, that's terrifying. 3, it's just kind of a weird setup. And 4, fuck that, that's terrifying. The spider should also just get left there in the lab instead of coming home with Peter. That was a weird choice to make, I don't really get that. Peter runs into Gwen on his way out, and she's confused to see him there, but he has to go before he can explain himself. Peter starts to head home, yada yada yada, you know how it goes. He starts getting his powers.
But you yada yada over the best part.
And he looks up information on ask.com to try and figure out what's going on. The movie keeps going, and Peter goes to Connors' house to speak with him. He says that he's the son of the tiger from Life of Pi.
I'm Richard Parker's son.
And Connors lets him inside. Jesus Christ, that was a stupid joke. Why did I write that? Nobody's gonna get that. Nobody's gonna get that joke. Together, the two of them figure out the missing equation to the formula. Peter uses a piece of his father's work, but he provides something new on his own, showing that he's really gifted and he's not just freeloading off of his dad's stuff. Also, Billy is there during the scene as well, just to give a little bit more screen time to him and his relationship with his father and the Connors family as a whole. That's cool. Peter and Gwen interact a little bit. The original placement of the scene was a little bit strange. It was placed after the whole scene with Flash, so I'm moving it up a bit to here. They talk about why Peter was at Oscorp and he comes up with an excuse, and the banter's starting to grow a bit and the relationship is starting to form here. Flash comes up and decides to push Peter around, and Peter decides to push back. He doesn't do anything like absurd to the point where he clearly has powers, but he just embarrasses Flash just enough, and maybe they get into a fight, and Peter gets sent to the principal's office for it. Ben picks him up, yells at him a bit, and we get a few hints about the responsibility motto, but nothing concrete. We get rid of that fucking skateboard montage. I honestly thought that was a fever dream. I forgot that was in the movie. Instead, replace the scene with just Peter trying to figure out his powers and get used to things. Maybe in like a sort of Shazam style where he's having fun, lifting shit, jumping around. He meets with Connors again, and together they figure out a key to the formula. Peter goes home to realize that he forgot to pick up Aunt May, and he gets yelled at again by Ben. And here I want to talk about the whole "with great power comes great responsibility" line. I am not someone who needs to hear the full phrase. I think that if you just express the idea of responsibility in a Spider-Man story, then you're doing a good job. Not everything can fit in a nice little catchy phrase after all. Especially since this one is so ingrained into culture that it's almost lost some of its meaning. As a kid growing up, I didn't really understand what it meant, mostly because of the sheer oversaturation of it. It wasn't until this movie, where it was explained to me in a different way, that it finally clicked with me about what exactly it all meant. Maybe I'm just an idiot though, who knows? But I think that it's important to express the idea in ways that are different, especially since that's the big lesson of the character and you want everybody to get it. Anyway, that was a long tangent, probably not necessary, but we keep going and we get to Ben's death. I personally think that it was handled pretty well, or about as well as it possibly could be given that it's the second time we've seen it. I really like how Peter spending time with Connors and subsequently learning more about his father leads to him ignoring the real father in his life, Ben, only to end up losing him because of it. There's something so tragic about all of it that I think fits really well into the themes of this movie. I think that like the circumstances of Peter getting mad at the store clerk was a little bit weird. Maybe the clerk could have bullied him a little bit more and been actually a little bit more mean, so it'd be more justified. But it's not something I think is terrible terrible, and I don't have a good alternative for it. So I actually quite like Ben getting killed because he tried to wrestle the gun away from the killer. It's really nice to see Ben actually act upon the whole great responsibility motif instead of just saying it. So Ben dies, and Peter holds his uncle in his arms, and he cries in the street. A lot of people make fun of the scene in Andrew Garfield's performance, but I think he actually did a really good job here showing the pain of losing some of the only family that Peter has left. So for the second act, the movie's actually really similar to what we got. I really like the stuff with Peter going on a quest to find Ben's killer. It's a different take on the lesson that he learns from Ben's death, and I like how it takes a little bit longer for him to realize what it means to be responsible. It makes sense for him to not figure it all out right away, and to make some irresponsible choices because of it. During the sequence, Peter starts to build his suit. There's a lot of debate with this suit. Some people absolutely love it, and some people think it's hideous. I think I'm in the middle, leaning a bit towards liking it though. I really like the texture, like the basketball texture, but I don't like how it doesn't connect around the waist. It's like when Superman doesn't have any red around his waist. It just, something about it looks weird. It looks like a big blob of blue. I also hate the eyes.
Those eyes! Those horrible yellow eyes!
I really like how they came from sunglasses. I think that's really cool for the more like realistic homemade look, but they really should have been silver instead of that weird like yellow. Moving on, we still get that scene with him and the car thief. I like that scene, but not because Spider-Man is quippy, but because it further shows how Peter hasn't learned what it means to be responsible yet. And it's the classic case of the bullied victim becoming the bully. And I think that's really interesting. The next scene is of Connors and Octavius. It's similar to that scene that we got, but there's one major difference. If you're like me and you haven't seen the movie in a while, you probably don't remember this, but in the original, Connors' boss wants to do human trials on the formula early, and Connors disagrees. And that somehow leads to Connors testing it on himself. I honestly can't for the life of me understand this motivation since it doesn't really add up. So instead, I think that the two should basically switch sides. Otto is proud of the potential for Connors' formula, and so Connors wants human trials to start right away, saying that the longer they wait, the less they can help. Except Otto thinks that people could get hurt, and he says that they need some more time to be safe and go through the proper channels first. I think that Dr. Connors has always worked best when he parallels Peter's ideals of responsibility, only twisted, especially when it comes to his experiments and helping people. Connors is the kind of guy who's willing to do anything to help someone, even if it ends up breaking a few moral violations. And that is usually what ends up leading to him becoming the lizard. I think that swapping these two's motivations in this scene not only makes each character more interesting, since it's always really nice to see Octavius be an actually good person, but also makes more sense for Connors to begin testing on himself. Moving on, Gwen invites Peter over to dinner, and Connors decides to cut through all the red tape and to test the formula on himself. It seems like the formula works though, because his arm does grow back, but he can feel something happening to him, something in his mind and his body. His wife comes out to check on him, and a gigantic lizard roars in her face. Now I want to take a second to talk about the lizard's design. It's ass. It's awful. What were they thinking? I kind of see how it's similar to the classic Ditko Stanley stuff with the flatter face, but in practice it just looks terrible. I also get that if he had the snout, it would be harder to express emotions. Like, come on, believe me, I understand. I saw the new Lion King movie, I get it. But he's a giant CGI lizard. They could have found some creative way to work around it. At the very least, just add the snout. Martha runs from the lizard and he manages to escape out their window. We get the dinner scene, which is a very good scene. I like the scene a lot because finally someone is challenging Peter's view of himself and the world and calls into question whether or not Spider-Man's even helping, which can push him to making that important realization during that scene on the bridge. Peter and Gwen kiss on the roof and she finds out that he's Spider-Man. And here's where the relationship can be as cute and bantery as we want, since now it's more believable that they've grown to that point. Then we get to the scene with the bridge. Oh my god, the bridge scene. I think everybody can agree that this whole scene is the best scene in the movie, and it's one of the best Spider-Man scenes we've ever had. The interaction between Peter and Jack in the car is absolutely top-tier Spider-Man writing. I have a video about why hero moments like this are so important, and this scene is one of the best examples of that. Not only is it just a great interaction, but saving Jack and seeing him and his father reunited is the thing that finally triggers Peter to understand what it means to be responsible. He's not Spider-Man for some selfish vendetta against the man who killed his uncle. He's Spider-Man because it's his responsibility. We keep going, and Connors doesn't transform back into a human. He stays in his lizard form for the rest of the movie. He escapes to the sewer where he makes a bit of a lair for himself.
A lair. Yes.
Captain Stacy places a warrant out for Spider-Man's arrest, and we get that scene with Gwen and Peter on the football field. This scene's pretty good. It develops their relationship some more, and I really like this line a lot.
I gotta go after it.
That's not your job.
Maybe it is.
Except Peter shouldn't throw the football so hard that it dents the goalpost. Peter figures that the best person to talk to about this giant lizard is Dr. Connors, and so he decides to head to his house to see him. Except, he sees a squad of police surrounding the area. He talks to Martha, and she tells him that a giant lizard broke into their house and kidnapped Kurt. Together, they figure out that most reptiles like isolated caverns with lots of water, and they put together that it must have gone to the sewers. This is what we call a bit of dramatic irony here, since we know that Kurt is the lizard, but our characters don't. There's a little bit of 7th grade English class for you there. Peter goes to the sewer, and we're cutting out the whole thing with the Daily Bugle and the reward for pictures of the lizard. This all is pretty high stakes, especially after Peter just learned his lesson about responsibility, so it's pretty out of character for him to try and make a quick buck on the whole thing, especially when he thinks that Dr. Connors is in danger. He goes to the sewer, and we get that fight with him and the lizard. During that fight, Peter's mask gets ripped off of him, and the lizard says in a reptilian, monstrous voice,
Peter Parker.
Peter's eyes widen as he realizes that this lizard didn't kidnap Kurt. He is Kurt. They fight some more, and Peter gets injured before managing to escape, and he heads to Gwen's. Gwen patches him up, and Peter talks about how it's his fault that the lizard exists. He puts all the pieces of the puzzle together with the formula and Connors insisting on human trials, but more importantly, how he helped create the serum and he needs to stop him before anyone gets hurt. We cut to Connors in his lair, and we have a scene where his more human side is trying to fight back against the lizard, but he's overpowered. This introduces us to the concept that the lizard is more than just a monster. It has pieces of Kurt's mind still remaining. The lizard breaks into Midtown High, and we get that fight at the school.
I'm gonna throw you out the window now.
Pretty good fight, great choreography, and the greatest Stanley cameo ever, so nothing major to change here. Peter follows the lizard through the sewers into his lair, and he calls Gwen, and she starts working on a cure. This is where we learn his big grand scheme. His horrible, evil supervillain plan is nothing. He doesn't really have one. He doesn't want to turn New York into lizards, or use like the cloudburst from Arkham Knight, or have lizards rise up against the masses. He's just a big giant lizard. And so instead of treating him like a supervillain, we need to treat him more like a movie monster. I've never really preferred stories where the lizard has like a grand scheme, because to me the interesting part about the character is the Dr. Connors side. I've always compared Connors to a werewolf, because I really like werewolves. With a werewolf, the interesting part about those monsters is the human side of them. They transform and they become rabid monsters, and it's the human who has to deal with the repercussions. And the people who are trying to fight the monster, they have to make the choice between letting the human live or the monster die. And I think this is the kind of story that works the best for the lizard in this movie. So all that Peter finds in the lizard's lair is just etchings and dead animals and words written in blood on the walls. Words that relate to Dr. Connors and his life. It looks like Dr. Connors' mental state is deteriorating over time, and as time passes, he becomes more and more reptilian. Peter puts together that if it goes too far, he won't be able to change Kurt back. The lizard side of Connors' brain is recognizing people and ideas related to Connors' human side, and is compelled to act aggressively in order to destroy what is left of that human side. Of those etchings, the word that is written the most is Oscorp, with some of the blood still wet. And Peter realizes that Connors' next target is his lab, right where Gwen is forming the cure. So for the rest of the final act of the movie, it's a much smaller scope than we originally got. Instead of a standard superhero movie with a big light in the sky and world-ending stakes, it's more like a monster movie, with personal stakes for Peter and Gwen to try and save others while also saving Connors from himself. So Peter rushes to Oscorp, but he gets ambushed by Captain Stacy and nearly arrested. As they pull off his mask, he takes down every one of the officers, he webs his mask back up, and as he's putting it on, Stacy trains a gun on him. Peter turns around wearing his mask, and he tells Stacy that there are innocent lives in danger, including his daughter, and he needs to help them. Stacy hesitates for a second before letting Peter go. He doesn't find out that he's Spider-Man, and I'll talk about that a bit later. As Peter swings off, an officer fires a single shot and injures his leg. We cut to Gwen in Oscorp. She breaks into Connors' lab to try and formulate a cure, but someone's already in there. Martha Connors. She's in there with Billy, keeping him safe. She lied about thinking Kurt was kidnapped, knowing full well that it was him all along. And she's already developed a cure that's formulating now. She knows that Kurt is still in there, because if he weren't, then she would have been killed back at her home. As the cure is being produced, the power goes out, and the lizard breaks into the lab. We get a Velociraptors in the kitchen style of scene as the lizard stalks around the lab searching for the two of them, destroying equipment in the process. We cut back to Peter with his injured leg, and he's having trouble moving quickly. He lands on a rooftop blocks away from Oscorp. He's running out of time. If only there were a set of cranes that could perfectly line up to allow Peter to swing easily to get to his destination. No, stop it. No, quit it. I get where you were going with this, but stop it. In theory, I like the idea of the crane sequence because it's always really great to see Peter get help from New York, like the kind of, you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us moments from the original Spider-Man. But in practice, this scene was so stupid. I don't like giving the criticism that something is stupid because it doesn't add much to the conversation, but this scene was stupid. Not only does it just not make sense in the scene for there to be that many cranes all along in one straight line, but Peter hasn't actually helped New York in any substantial way to earn this kind of moment. The reason these scenes are great is because it's people of the city paying Spider-Man back for all the good that he does. In this movie, he spends most of his Spider-Man life on a personal vendetta against a very specific looking criminal, and he only actually saves people on the bridge. So my proposal to change the crane scene is actually pretty simple. Get rid of all the shit, all this shit, all that shit, cut it down to what really matters in this scene, and that's the one person that Peter did save. Peter starts to limp across the roof, slowly building to a sprint. He leaps off the roof, but he trips and he falters and he begins to fall to the ground out of frame. A beat passes and a single crane rises into frame with Peter riding on top of it. Peter looks up to see the person operating the crane. It's Jack's father, the man from the bridge. Peter uses the crane to get his bearings straight and realign himself before using the momentum of it to propel himself forward and swing to Oscorp. Meanwhile, the lizard discovers Gwen, Martha, and Billy, and Martha tries to reason with him, saying that she knows he's still in there and that he can fight it. The lizard hesitates for a moment before his eyes go bloodshot and he attacks. Spider-Man breaks through the window and slams a kick into Connors and knocks him away from Billy, Martha, and Gwen before they can get hurt. Peter gets him to safety and takes the cure from Gwen, and he fights the lizard. During the fight, he tries to reason with Connors and have him fight the reptilian side of his brain. It's the mention of Billy that really drives Connors to fight back hard against his reptilian brain. Peter uses this conflict to get the leg up and inject him with the cure. Connors transforms back into a boring, one-armed, non-reptile scientist. I mean, what the fuck? Talk about a shitty deal. He didn't even get to keep the tail. Peter has the opportunity to arrest Connors, but as he starts to restrain him, he looks over to see Billy standing in the corner, scared for his father. In that moment, Peter sees himself in this boy, and he decides to let Connors go free so that another child won't lose their father the way that he did. You may have noticed that I didn't mention Captain Stacy or his death. That's because I think we should save that relationship and dynamic for another movie. I also think that he shouldn't find out that Peter's Spider-Man. Maybe it's implied that he kind of figured it out, but nothing concrete. I personally did not find his death very meaningful, and I think that if they develop the character some more in a future movie, it would be a much more impactful death. The movie ends with Peter and Gwen together. I'm normally not a fan of ending Spider-Man movies with him with the love interest, because I think it works really well with the whole Peter's life sucks aspect, but if they were to end up apart, it would be a little bit too similar to the first Raimi movie, so for now we're going to have them together. Having found meaning in his life unrelated to the trauma of his parents and Ben, Peter's able to function a bit more socially in school and behave more like the Peter that we traditionally know. Peter made a serious journey emotionally as well as physically in this movie. And while the road was rocky, he understands now the meaning of responsibility and he knows his place in the world as the amazing Spider-Man. All in all, this movie isn't bad. It's not good, but it's definitely not bad. It rests in that fine line of enjoyable enough superhero movies that are a good time and have a few interesting concepts, but they have enough pitfalls to ruin the experience for a lot of people. But I do think that there's potential for a good movie here. Of course, it would never live up to the greatness that is the Raimi trilogy, but there was potential for it to be a really good time if it didn't have all the studio heads bogging it down and making it more and more generic by the minute. So hopefully this video brings to light some of the good about this movie. I'm tired of everybody treating it like it's the plague. There's a lot of good stuff in this movie and some even great stuff, and I think that this movie could have been the start to a really impressive franchise of films that improve over time and give us a great Spider-Man experience that we can all— oh god damn it! Hey everybody! Thanks for watching. If you're new here and you like this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, maybe ring that notification bell so you don't miss any updates. Hit that like button if you liked this video, hit the dislike button if you didn't like it. I'm cool with either one. You do you. I have a Patreon, and I've decided to redo it, basically restructure everything with new tiers and new benefits and stuff, like scripts and audio files and discussions and a Discord server. So if you're interested in supporting the channel further, please go ahead and check that out. I would really, really appreciate it. But anyway, with that said, this has been TroyBoy17 coming at you live with a Fanboy rewrite, and I'll see you around.